First story, 36 Hours in the Dark, Cold War, 1967. I still don't know exactly what happened that night. I can't say I remember much of it, to be honest. What I do remember is standing guard, like I had done hundreds of times before. The air was cold, dry, and still, and I was alone in that outpost. It was the middle of the night, around 2 a.m., and the place was quiet, like always. Just the hum of the old equipment, the occasional crackling of the radio, and the steady tick-tick of the clock in the guard shack. There was nothing out of the ordinary, or at least I thought so. I was on a regular patrol around the perimeter of the missile silo, checking the locks, ensuring everything was secure. Nothing ever felt off before, but something felt different that night. I can't quite explain it. Maybe it was the shadows or the chill in the air, but there was something strange tugging at my gut, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I was nearing the silo when the strange sensation hit. It wasn't just the cold or the isolation. No, this felt like something else. It was as if the world around me shifted, as if time itself had bent. My watch, I remember, looking at it right before everything went dark, was stuck. The second hand didn't move, the numbers didn't tick forward. It felt like a clock had broken in that moment, but everything else around me seemed perfectly fine. That's the last thing I recall before I blacked out. I'm not sure how long I was gone, but I woke up feeling dizzy, disoriented, and completely alone. I was no longer standing at the perimeter of the silo. No, I was somewhere else, somewhere unfamiliar. I couldn't even tell you how I got there. My mind was fuzzy, and when I tried to stand, my legs felt like they had been weighed down with lead. Every movement was slow, as if my body was fighting me. It took a moment to focus and look around, but when I did, I realized I was inside the silo itself, the very place I was supposed to be guarding. The walls were cold, metallic, and the place smelled stale. Like something was decaying, but not in the usual way. It wasn't a natural scent. It was chemical, almost sterile, like something artificial. The air felt thick, as if I was breathing in something heavy, something that didn't belong. My heart was racing, and I tried to focus on anything at all to make sense of it. I looked down at my uniform, still on me, thank God, but it felt different. Tight. Too tight. As if it didn't fit quite right. My boots scraped the concrete floor as I staggered forward, the echo of my steps making me jump with every sound. The silo was darker than I remembered, the only light coming from an overhead lamp that flickered in and out, casting long, strange shadows on the walls. It didn't make sense. I had been outside not minutes ago, guarding the perimeter. But now I was standing in the heart of the silo, a place no one was ever supposed to be. Not without clearance, not without permission, and definitely not in the middle of the night. But I was there, and I couldn't remember how I got there. I stumbled through the dimly lit corridor, every step feeling like a weight on my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, but when I looked around there was nothing but shadows. Just the endless steel walls of the silo and the harsh, flickering light above. My breathing was shallow, erratic, and I tried to steady myself. Something was wrong. I couldn't explain it, but everything felt off. The silence was deafening, too quiet, almost as if the world had gone still. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, thudding louder than it should have. I walked deeper into the facility, passing by rows of what looked like storage units, mechanical equipment I didn't recognize. My mind was racing. Where was I? Where were the other guards? Why couldn't I remember how I got there? It was like a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. Every corner I turned seemed to lead to another dark hallway, and I felt trapped, in a loop, as if the place itself was shifting, rearranging. The thought hit me like a punch. This wasn't just some mistake. I wasn't supposed to be here, but someone had brought me here. Or worse, someone had done this to me. My legs felt like they were moving on their own at this point. I wasn't thinking clearly, but something deep inside me, something primal, kept pushing me forward. I had to get out. I had to find someone. Anyone. I didn't care who, I just needed to find another person to help me make sense of this madness. But the further I went, the worse it got. The air grew heavier, thicker, and the walls felt like they were closing in on me. My breathing became more erratic, and I could feel a cold sweat breaking out along the back of my neck. The panic was rising, but I fought to keep it at bay. That's when I heard it, the sound of movement, footsteps, but not just any footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, almost dragging across the floor. I froze. I wasn't alone. My heart started racing again, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out. I tried to quiet my breathing, my thoughts scrambling to make sense of what was happening. But the sound of those footsteps grew louder, closer. I looked around frantically, but the hallway seemed empty. There was nowhere to hide. I was trapped. The footsteps stopped abruptly, and for a moment, everything went silent. Again, I stood still, frozen, hoping that whatever it was would just leave. But it didn't. There was a low hum that filled the air, a sound that seemed to come from all directions, vibrating in my skull. I could feel it, like it was coming from the walls themselves. My body trembled. It was as if I was being pulled toward something. My vision blurred and my thoughts felt foggy, like I wasn't in full control of them. It was as if something was influencing me, guiding me without my consent. I tried to shake it off, tried to fight it, but it was too powerful. I started walking again, this time more quickly, like I was being dragged by invisible hands. My feet carried me down another hallway, one that looked even more unfamiliar than the others. The further I went, the worse the feeling became. It was like I was sinking into something alien, something that didn't belong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but everything about this place screamed wrong. The deeper I went, the more I felt that I was being observed. I don't know how much time passed after that, but I found myself standing in front of a large door. It was a heavy metal thing, the kind you'd expect in a place like this, with a small window near the top. The hum in the air seemed to intensify as I stood there staring at the door. I didn't want to go in. Everything inside me screamed at me to turn around, to run, to leave. But I couldn't. It was like something was pulling me toward it, like I was being forced into it. I tried to resist, but the closer I got, the stronger the pull became. My hands reached out, almost involuntarily, and I felt the cold steel under my fingers. With a slow, almost mechanical movement, I pushed the door open. The room inside was like nothing I had ever seen before. It was dimly lit, with strange equipment scattered around, some of it looking almost too advanced for the time. There were monitors blinking in and out, strange symbols flashing across the screens. But it wasn't just the equipment that was unsettling, it was the feeling in the room. The air felt thick, almost oppressive, like it was pressing down on me from all sides. I couldn't breathe right, couldn't focus. It was like there was something in the very air that was changing the way I thought, warping my senses. My legs were shaky, and I felt like I might fall at any second. But it wasn't the room itself that terrified me. It was the figure standing at the far end, silhouetted against the dim light. I could barely make out the shape, but it was humanoid, tall, and completely still. My pulse thundered in my ears as I stood frozen in place, unable to move, unable to look away. The figure didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there, watching me. My mind was screaming, begging me to run, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed, unable to tear my eyes away from the figure. The hum was louder now, vibrating through my entire body, making my teeth ache. I felt something, some force, pressing against my chest, as if trying to push me toward the figure. It was suffocating, this presence, this overwhelming weight. And then, it spoke. Or at least, I think it did. It wasn't with words, not exactly. It was more like a voice inside my head, something foreign and alien, but unmistakable. I could feel its words in my bones, deep within me. It was telling me things. Horrible things, things I couldn't comprehend, but at the same time I understood them completely. It felt like it was reading my thoughts, twisting them, reshaping them into something I didn't recognize. My hands were trembling as I reached up, trying to cover my ears, but the voice didn't stop. It kept echoing in my skull, filling me with dread. It was as if it was in control of my mind, pulling it apart piece by piece. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. It was like my body was no longer my own, like I was trapped in a cage made of my own thoughts. I wanted to run, to break free from whatever was happening, but my legs wouldn't move. I couldn't move. I stood there, frozen, as the figure in front of me seemed to grow taller, more imposing. Its presence filled the room, suffocating me. I felt like I was going to collapse under the weight of it all, like I might just disappear into the air, swallowed by whatever this thing was. I don't know how long I stood there. It could have been seconds, or it could have been hours. Time didn't seem to matter anymore. All that mattered was the figure in front of me, the voice inside my head, and the crushing sensation that I wasn't alone, not in any way I could understand. The next thing I knew, I was outside. I don't know how I got there, or when I left the room. 1 minute I was standing in that impossible place, and the next I was back in the cold, dark night. My body felt wrong, disjointed, like I had just woken up from a long sleep, except I hadn't been sleeping. I was on the ground, lying on the cold concrete, staring up at the stars. The silo was far behind me now, but I didn't know how I had gotten there. I didn't even remember walking out. I could barely even remember who I was. It was like I was detached from everything, like I wasn't fully in control anymore. My thoughts were scrambled, and it felt like I was coming back from some deep fog that I couldn't shake off. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled beneath me. I had no strength. Panic rose up inside me again, but this time it wasn't just fear. It was confusion. How had I ended up here? What had just happened? I tried to focus, to make sense of it all, but the answers wouldn't come. Eventually, I managed to crawl to my feet, my body moving like a puppet on strings. Everything felt disconnected. My mind was foggy, disoriented. The night air felt sharp against my skin, but it couldn't clear the haze in my head. I stumbled, dragging my feet, not knowing where I was going, not knowing what I was supposed to do. It felt like I was a stranger to myself. I reached for my radio, but it was dead, static, no signal. That was when I noticed the odd, lingering hum in the air again. It was softer now, but still there, like it was embedded in the very fabric of the night. My head spun, and I felt the overwhelming need to leave the area, to get away from that place, from whatever it was that had just happened to me. I started walking, my steps unsteady, my mind racing, trying to piece together anything that made sense, but nothing made sense. There was nothing rational about this. My body wanted to reject it, but my mind kept replaying the image of that figure, the voice in my head. And I couldn't shake it. I had been inside that silo. I had felt it. Whatever it was, it had marked me, and I didn't know if I would ever be the same again. The next 36 hours were a blur. I have no clear memory of what happened during that time. The next thing I remember is waking up in a different part of the base, in a medical room, with people standing over me. They looked concerned, like they were talking to me, but their voices seemed distant, muffled. I couldn't understand what they were saying. I tried to speak, but my words felt strange, disconnected from my own thoughts. I could see their lips moving, but it was like I couldn't fully comprehend what they meant. The only thing I could focus on was the terrible, lingering feeling in my chest. Something was wrong with me, deeply wrong. I tried to explain what had happened, but the words wouldn't come out right. They just looked at me with confusion. Eventually they gave up, dismissing it as a result of stress or exhaustion. They kept asking me about the last few hours, but I couldn't answer them. I couldn't remember. It was like a piece of me was missing. It wasn't until 2 days later that they found me. They found me in the exact same spot, near the silo. I don't know how they knew where to look. They didn't have any idea what had happened to me, and I sure as hell didn't either. I couldn't even remember the walk back, let alone how I had ended up in the place I had been found. My mind was still foggy, clouded by whatever had happened during those missing hours. The thing that still haunts me is that no one could explain what happened. I had no injuries, no signs of trauma. There was no physical reason for me to have vanished like that, and yet I had. And when I returned, I was different, changed. I didn't feel like the same person anymore. It felt like something had shifted in me, like a part of my soul had been pulled out and replaced with something I couldn't recognize. To this day, I don't know what happened. I've tried to forget it, tried to push it out of my mind, but it's always there, lurking in the background, like a shadow that won't leave. I'm still working at the base, still guarding the same damn silo, but I can never shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I still hear that hum in my head sometimes, soft, distant, as if it's always lingering just beyond my consciousness. And when I close my eyes, I can still see the figure standing in that room, watching me. I don't know if I'll ever understand what happened. All I know is that I wasn't alone that night. Something else was with me, and it's still out there. Second story, Swallowed by the Sky, Northern France, 1916. I don't know how to explain what happened that day. It's been years now, but it still feels fresh in my mind, like I'm reliving it every time I think about it. We were entrenched in that hellhole in northern France during 1916, somewhere between the endless mud, rats, and constant gunfire. I was just another soldier in a line of many. But this, what happened here? It wasn't like anything I had ever experienced before. We had been under heavy fire for days. The constant barrage from German artillery just never stopped. That morning, we were all too exhausted to care. trying to catch a few moments of sleep, when something strange caught my attention. A cloud, a big dark cloud hanging low, just above the trench. It wasn't like any cloud I had seen before. It wasn't white or gray. It was a thick, almost oily black, swirling in a way that didn't make sense with the weather patterns. The air turned still when it arrived, like the whole world was holding its breath. Even the distant sounds of battle seemed muffled. It wasn't long before the others noticed it too. At first, no one said anything. We were all too confused to speak, watching that unnatural thing hanging over us. There was a strange silence. The usual hum of our rifles, the clink of canteens, the sound of men's boots in the mud, all of it was gone. All I could hear was my own breathing and the distant crack of gunfire. That's when it hit me. The air had changed. It wasn't the typical damp chill you feel in a trench. No, it felt thick, almost suffocating, like it was getting harder to take in a full breath. And then, without any warning, it just came down on us. A sudden rush, like the world exhaling, and the whole trench was swallowed up in the black cloud. I couldn't see a damn thing. Everything just went dark. The smell. It wasn't like anything I've smelled before. It wasn't gas, or smoke, or anything I could recognize. It was heavy, almost metallic, and it burned in my throat. My chest tightened. I tried to call out to my comrades, but my voice barely made it out. I couldn't even hear myself anymore. Only this ringing in my ears, like the world had suddenly stopped turning and everything had gone into a vacuum. When the cloud finally cleared, everything was silent. At first I thought I'd passed out, or maybe something had happened to my senses. But no, I was still standing there, barely able to breathe in that same trench. But something was wrong. So wrong. I looked around, expecting to see my fellow soldiers, but there was nothing. Nothing at all. The trench, which had been full of men just moments ago, was completely empty. I started calling out, my voice shaking, "Where are you?" But there was no answer. There weren't even any signs that anyone had been there. No dropped gear, no helmets, no discarded rifles, nothing. It was like the men had just vanished, like they'd never existed. Panic set in. I scrambled to the edge of the trench, thinking maybe they'd run off or were hiding somewhere, but there was nothing, not a single footprint in the mud. It was like the earth had swallowed them whole, leaving no trace. I climbed out and looked around, my heart racing. There were no bodies, no signs of struggle, no movement, just the empty battlefield. My head was spinning. I didn't understand it, couldn't make sense of it. I knew I wasn't the only one who saw the cloud. I couldn't have imagined it. Right? There were other men in the trench with me, but no one was around. I started walking through the muck, calling out again, louder this time, hoping for some response, anything, but all I heard was the wind and the distant rumble of artillery. It felt like the whole world had forgotten about us. I stumbled through the trench, my boots splashing in the mud, hoping to find some kind of sign, some explanation for what had just happened. The feeling of dread was suffocating, like I was being watched, but by something I couldn't see. The worst part was that it wasn't just the soldiers who were gone. The whole trench, our supplies, our weapons, everything had just disappeared. It was like the cloud had taken it all. I even checked the perimeter, thinking maybe someone had come to collect the bodies, but there was nothing. No tracks, no signs of anyone having been there. Just the silence. I felt like I was losing my mind. My hands were shaking, my heart racing, and I was barely able to keep my feet moving. I went back to the spot where I had been standing when the cloud hit, trying to retrace my steps. I remember the feeling of the air pressing down on me, how heavy and suffocating it had felt. There was a distinct taste in the back of my throat, like I had been chewing on metal. I didn't know what to think. My mind was trying to make sense of it all, some sort of gas attack, maybe a hallucination brought on by the exhaustion, the fear. But no, this didn't feel like anything I'd ever experienced before. It was more than just the cloud, more than just the disappearance of my comrades. It was a feeling, a sense of dread that gripped me, like something had been taken from me, something I could never get back. I'm telling you, it was like the entire landscape had been erased, like time had stopped for just a moment, and in that moment, everything was wiped clean. I can't explain why, but I decided to leave the trench. I don't know what drove me to climb out of that pit and head into the open battlefield, but I did. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was just the sheer need to find some clue, some answer. I wandered aimlessly for what felt like hours, but nothing changed. I passed through the torn, devastated land, the remains of what had once been a brutal war zone. But all I could think about was the emptiness around me. It wasn't just that the trench had been abandoned. It was that everything had been. The ground was barren, silent. I started to wonder if I was the last person left in the world. Every step I took felt heavier than the last, like something was pressing down on me, telling me to stop, to give up. But I couldn't. I needed to understand. My thoughts were running wild, and I had no way of knowing what had truly happened. I walked and walked, not really paying attention to where I was going, my thoughts racing, my eyes darting around the desolate landscape. The eerie quietness was starting to make me feel like I was trapped in some twisted version of reality. And for the first time since I'd joined the army, I felt truly alone. Not just physically alone, but as though I was outside of time, outside of the world I once knew. The horizon was empty, the sky an unnatural shade of pale gray, like it had forgotten what it was supposed to look like. I stumbled across the remnants of an old artillery shell that had exploded months ago, but even that seemed wrong. The way it lay there, like it didn't belong, like the whole war had been an illusion, and everything in it, every person, every death, every explosion, was just a cruel joke. I didn't know how long I had been walking, but I started to notice that the air felt different. It was thinner, harder to breathe. The same oppressive feeling I had felt back in the trench was creeping back. Something wasn't right. Something was watching me, and then I saw it. In the distance, barely visible at first, something moving. I stopped in my tracks, squinting through the haze. It wasn't a person. It wasn't a soldier. No, it was too tall, too alien. The shape seemed to hover just above the ground, like it wasn't walking but drifting. My heart stopped. For a second I thought I was imagining it, that the isolation was messing with my mind. But no, it was real. I saw it move again, and the air around it shimmered like heat rising off a desert road. The figure was dark, almost blending in with the sky, but there was something unnatural about it. I could feel it in my gut, like every fiber of my being was telling me to run, to turn around and never look back. But my body wouldn't listen. I was frozen, rooted to the spot, staring at this thing that defied every natural law I had ever known. It wasn't human, and I could feel it, deep down, that it knew I was there. I don't know how long I stood there, unable to move, unable to breathe. The creature, whatever it was, seemed to be getting closer, but it wasn't walking. Not really, it just glided. And with every step it took, the air around me felt colder, heavier. I could hear my heartbeat thumping in my ears, and the ringing that had never fully left after the cloud enveloped us earlier became deafening. It was like the sound was being drowned out by something else, something deeper. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the creature stopped. There was no movement. It didn't even look at me. It just stood there, an ominous silhouette against the sickly sky. A wave of nausea hit me, and I turned to run, my legs barely holding me up. But I felt as though I was being pulled back, like invisible hands were reaching out to grab me. I fought against it, running faster, harder, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still there, following me, watching me, even though I couldn't see it anymore. I don't know how long I kept running. The whole world seemed to spin around me as I stumbled forward, the distant sounds of war now completely silenced, replaced by that sickening hum in the air. My legs were burning, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but I couldn't stop. I felt like if I stopped for even a second, whatever was behind me would catch up. And it wasn't just the creature. I could feel the ground beneath me, the earth shifting. It was like the land itself was alive. Like something in the very soil wanted to pull me under. I couldn't make sense of any of it. Everything I had ever known about reality, about life and death, had been shattered in those few moments when the cloud had descended. I wasn't running from just a creature anymore. I was running from something much bigger, something that I couldn't even comprehend. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see it right behind me, but I never saw it again. Still, the sense of dread only deepened, like a presence was hovering just out of sight. I didn't stop until I reached a small ravine, the edge of a trench system that seemed abandoned. I collapsed against the dirt wall, trying to steady my breath, trying to wrap my head around what had happened. My body was shaking uncontrollably, and my mind was fighting to make sense of it all. But no matter how much I tried, nothing made sense. The soldiers, my comrades, they were gone, vanished into thin air as if they had never existed. The creature, if that's what it was, had been real. And the worst part was, the more I thought about it, the less I felt like I was in control of myself. It was like that thing, that presence, was still lingering in my mind, pulling at the edges of my thoughts. The cloud, the creature, the soldiers, none of it made sense. And yet, I knew deep down that it was all connected. My breath hitched again, and I felt a cold sweat breaking out along my skin. Was I losing my mind? Or had something happened to me out there in that field, something I could never explain? As I sat there, alone in the ravine, the world seemed to quiet down even more. It was like I was no longer part of the reality I had known. I felt as if I had been dropped into some dark, twisted version of the war, a war that no one could explain, a war where people simply disappeared, and no one would ever know. Not a single person would believe me if I told them what happened. They'd say I was sick, that I had lost my mind in the trenches like so many others. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. Something in that place, in that moment, had shifted. Something had taken the soldiers. Something had taken them, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was next. I don't remember falling asleep that night. I must have passed out from exhaustion, but even then, I couldn't escape the terror. My dreams were worse than the waking nightmare I had been through. In my sleep, I saw the men who had disappeared, their faces blank and lifeless, floating in the same black cloud that had swallowed us. They were reaching for me, their eyes wide, begging for something, anything, but there was no sound, no words, just the deafening silence, like the world had taken away everything we knew, everything we were. I woke up hours later with the taste of metal in my mouth, my body drenched in sweat. The same thick, suffocating air lingered around me. My heart raced as I sat up, my hands still trembling, but the ravine was empty now, silent. No more shadows, no more shapes, no creature. But that feeling, that nagging feeling, was still there, hanging in the air like a cloud that refused to dissipate. I got up, trying to shake the horror of the dream off, but I knew in my gut that something was terribly wrong. I wasn't just having nightmares. This was real. I couldn't stay in that place. I couldn't stay in that trench or near that ravine. I wasn't sure what had happened or if anyone would believe me, but I had to get away. I found my way back to the main line of the French forces, where I was greeted by other soldiers. They looked at me strangely, like I had been gone for far longer than I had. They asked me what had happened, why I looked so shaken, but I couldn't bring myself to explain. I couldn't even speak. It was like the words wouldn't come out. What was I supposed to say? I saw a cloud that took everyone away. There was something out there, something not human. They wouldn't believe me, and I wasn't sure I believed myself. It didn't matter anyway. I could feel it still, the presence, the weight of what had happened, and I knew it was following me. Watching me. The others didn't see it, they didn't feel it, they couldn't know, but I did, and that knowledge was enough to make my skin crawl. Eventually the war ended, and I left the battlefield behind. I came home, tried to pick up the pieces of my life, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't done with whatever had happened out there. I didn't talk to anyone about it. I couldn't. I just kept it to myself, burying the memory deep down, as deep as I could, but it never really went away. Every time I close my eyes, I can still see that cloud. I can still feel the heaviness in the air. The soldiers who vanished without a trace, the creature that watched me from the distance. It's been years, and yet it's like it happened just yesterday. Sometimes when I'm alone in the dark, I wonder if I'm still being watched, if that thing is still out there. I don't know why it stopped that day, or why it let me go. If you're enjoying this and want to support the channel in bringing more chilling stories like this, any contribution is greatly appreciated. The donation link is just below this video. It's safe, easy, and fast. No registration required. Even the smallest support means so much. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Third story, Soldiers Lost in Time, Baghdad, 2003. It was the night of April 6, 2003, just days after the U.S. forces had invaded Baghdad. The air was thick with smoke, the city was in chaos, and we were on high alert. I was part of a small squad sent to secure a position on the outskirts of the city, and like the others, I was barely keeping my eyes open. The stress of the situation had made sleep almost impossible, but no one dared close their eyes for long. Something about that night felt different, though, like we were being watched. It was only a few hours into the shift when one of the soldiers in my group, Corporal Richards, pointed at the sky. At first I thought he was seeing something in the distance, maybe a flare or some kind of aircraft. But as I looked up, I froze. There, above the city, was a light, a bright, almost blinding light. It wasn't a flare, It wasn't a helicopter or any kind of aircraft I had ever seen. It was too steady, too still. I couldn't make sense of it. It was just there, hanging in the sky, almost like it was watching us. And then it began to move. The object wasn't just hovering anymore. It drifted slowly, almost as if it was studying the city below. The entire squad was watching now, mesmerized by this strange, glowing craft. It didn't make a sound, no engine hum, no whirring of propellers, nothing. It was just this eerie silence with a light that didn't belong. My mind was racing, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a drone, maybe a secret military craft, anything that could explain what we were seeing. But nothing fit. As the minutes stretched on, I could feel the tension in my body tightening. We were out there in the open, and that thing was above us, too high to shoot at but too close for comfort. It stayed there for what felt like forever, just hanging in the air. That's when something else happened. Two of my squad mates, Private Anderson and Specialist Carter, were standing off to the side, talking quietly. They were both looking up at the object, but their faces slowly went blank, like they were in some kind of trance. One by one, they started walking toward the middle of the street, completely oblivious to what was going on around them. I called out to them, but they didn't respond. They just kept moving, walking without any urgency, like they were drawn to something. I'm not proud to say that I hesitated. In a situation like this, in a war zone, you don't think about the consequences too much. You act on instinct. But I stood there for a moment, frozen, just watching as the two of them moved forward. Then, without warning, the light above us grew brighter, almost blindingly so. I had to squint just to keep my eyes on it. And then, just like that, both Anderson and Carter were gone. It happened so quickly that I thought I'd imagined it. 1 second they were there, walking, and the next, nothing. There was no sound, no flash, no explosion. Just empty space where they'd been. The whole squad stood in stunned silence, unable to process what had just happened. I don't know how long we stood there, staring at the spot where they had disappeared, but the object was gone by the time I snapped out of my stupor. It was like it had just vanished into thin air, disappearing into the night. We searched the area for hours, calling their names, trying to make sense of it all, but we found nothing. There was no sign of them. It was as though they had never been there at all. The next 2 days were pure hell. I don't know how we kept our composure, but somehow we had to. It was a war zone, and the last thing we could afford was to let the fear take over. We kept going through the motions, patrolling, setting up positions, securing the perimeter. But there was always this gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach. The other soldiers were quiet, distant, like they were holding their breath, waiting for something else to happen. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of Anderson and Carter. The way they'd walked away without a second thought, like they were compelled. I couldn't shake the image of their blank stares. It was like they weren't themselves anymore, like something else had taken over. I tried to tell myself it was just the stress of the situation, that I was overthinking things. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The whole squad knew it. On the morning of the 8th, 2 days after they had vanished, Anderson and Carter just showed up again like nothing had happened. At first, I thought I was seeing things. They just appeared out of nowhere, walking down the road like they'd been there the whole time. I rushed over to them, my heart pounding. They didn't look injured, but there was something off about them. Something I couldn't put my finger on. Their faces were pale, almost sickly, and their eyes didn't look right. They were too wide, too vacant. When I asked them what happened, they just stared at me blankly. They didn't remember a thing. Nothing. No recollection of the 2 days they'd been missing, no memory of the light, no idea of where they'd gone. They acted like they had just been on a routine patrol. It didn't make any sense. I pulled them aside and checked them over. That's when I saw the marks. Small, surgical-looking cuts on their arms and necks. Like someone had been working on them. They weren't deep, but they were definitely not self-inflicted. I tried to get them to talk about it, but they just kept repeating that they didn't remember anything. The whole situation felt wrong, like the 2 men standing in front of me weren't even the same people. They looked like them, but they weren't. We didn't have the time or the resources to investigate further. The war was still ongoing, and orders were orders. But that didn't stop me from watching them closely. Something was wrong. Every time I looked at Anderson and Carter, I saw the same blank look in their eyes. They'd smile, they'd laugh, but it didn't feel real. It was like they were just going through the motions, like they were pretending to be the same guys we knew. I don't know how to explain it, but I started to feel like they weren't entirely human anymore. As the days went by, they began to act even stranger. They would zone out for minutes at a time, sometimes hours, just staring off into space with no reaction to anything going on around them. Other times, they would say things that didn't make sense, random, disconnected phrases that had nothing to do with what we were talking about. It was clear they weren't in control of their own thoughts anymore. But then, just when I thought I might finally get them to open up, they would snap out of it, as if nothing had happened. It was like they were living in 2 different realities at once, one where they were themselves, and one where they weren't. It wasn't long before I started hearing things. Soft whispers, barely audible, but they were there. At night, when everyone was supposed to be resting, I could hear it. The faint hum of something distant, a low-frequency sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was like it was coming from inside my head, but I could feel it in the air too, vibrating the ground beneath me. The first time I noticed it, I thought I was just overtired. But as the days went on, the whispers became harder to ignore. At first I thought I was just being paranoid, the stress of the war messing with my mind. But there were others who heard it too. One night, I was on guard duty with Sergeant Thompson, and I asked him if he could hear it. He went quiet for a second, then nodded, his face pale. "It's not just you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been hearing it too." He didn't say anything else, just kept looking around nervously. We both knew something was wrong, but neither of us could explain it. No one spoke about it openly, but there was this underlying tension, like everyone could feel the presence of something that wasn't supposed to be there. It was like the air itself was alive, suffocating us. The most disturbing part was that Anderson and Carter's behavior got even worse after that. One night I caught them both standing on the edge of the camp, staring at the sky. They were standing so still, I almost thought they were statues. I walked up to them, calling their names, but they didn't react. I shook Carter by the shoulder, but it was like I wasn't even there. I had to physically pull them apart, and when I did, it was like waking them from a trance. They blinked, looking confused, as if they had no idea how they got there. Carter mumbled something about the lights and the quiet. Anderson didn't say a word, just stood there, eyes wide, breathing shallowly. It was then that I realized something even more unsettling. They didn't remember being in the trance. They didn't even realize they had been standing there for hours, staring at the stars. It was like they'd just snapped back into reality without any recollection of what had happened in between. The fear that had been growing inside me bloomed into something much darker. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had taken them those 2 days, whatever had altered them, wasn't done with them yet. And it wasn't done with me either. I tried to talk to the higher-ups about it, but they just brushed me off. They were too focused on the war, too preoccupied with everything happening around us. No one took me seriously. The incident was buried, swept under the rug, like so many others in a place like Iraq. But I couldn't forget. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I saw Anderson and Carter, I couldn't shake the image of them walking away into that strange trance, or the surgical marks on their bodies, and the whispers. They kept getting louder. Every night I could hear them, and sometimes it felt like they were coming from inside my head. I was losing sleep, my mind unraveling, consumed by a fear I couldn't explain. The whole squad was on edge, but we didn't talk about it. There was no room for that kind of thing when there was a war to be fought. But the fear lingered, gnawing at us all, especially me. Something in the air felt wrong, like the world had tilted slightly out of alignment, and none of us could find our footing again. I remember the last time I saw Anderson and Carter, about a week after they reappeared. They had been getting worse. It wasn't just the trances anymore. They started to do things that weren't like them at all. Anderson, who had always been the quiet, no-nonsense type, started acting erratic. He would laugh at nothing, his eyes darting around like he was seeing things no one else could. Carter, on the other hand, grew more distant, almost like he was in a constant state of confusion. But it wasn't just their behavior. The whispers that had been plaguing me were now starting to affect them too. I saw it in their eyes, the way they would look off into the distance, their pupils dilating as if they were hearing it too. I couldn't take it anymore. I was about to go to the medics to get some kind of explanation when something happened that I still can't explain. One night, just as I was about to leave the camp to find help, I saw Anderson and Carter standing by the edge of the camp again. They weren't looking at the sky this time. They were staring at me, just staring. There was no recognition in their eyes, no warmth, no human connection. Just cold, empty stares. I called out to them, but they didn't respond. Then, they turned around together and walked into the night, without a word. That was the last time I ever saw them. They just disappeared into the dark, like they were being pulled away by something I couldn't see. I never found out what happened to them. After that, everything just stopped. No more whispers, no more strange behavior. It was like the whole incident had been erased, like it never happened. At least, that's what I told myself. The war went on, the chaos of Baghdad continued, and we pushed forward. But something inside me snapped that night. I couldn't shake the feeling that what I had witnessed, what I had been a part of, was not something I would ever be able to explain. I tried to move on, to pretend it didn't haunt me every single night when I closed my eyes. But I could never forget the cold stares of Anderson and Carter, or the way they had walked into the dark like they were being called by something, or someone, far beyond us. I kept asking myself, what happened to them? Why was I spared? I couldn't let go of the questions, and the fear kept growing inside me. I knew something in that city had changed me, but I couldn't tell anyone. I couldn't explain the way I felt, the way the air felt thick with a presence I couldn't describe. So I kept it all in, pushing the thoughts to the back of my mind, even though they never left. Months later, after I was back home and the war was a distant memory, the thoughts still wouldn't go away. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, hearing the whispers again, but now they were fainter, more distant, like they were buried in the back of my mind. I would look out my window at the dark sky, half expecting to see that light again, to feel that same sensation of being watched. I tried to tell myself it was just the stress, just the trauma of the war, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. There was something about that night, something about those 2 days that felt like it had left a mark on me, something that would never wash away. Sometimes, I would run into other veterans from that time, and I would see the same haunted look in their eyes. They never talked about it, not directly, but I could tell. There was something in the air when we spoke, an unspoken understanding. We had all felt it. Something happened to us in Iraq, something that none of us could ever explain. Maybe it was the war itself that warped us, or maybe it was something else, something beyond our understanding. I can't say for sure. But every time I think back to that night, to those 2 soldiers who disappeared without a trace, I wonder if they ever came back the same, or if they ever came back at all. The years passed, and life moved on, but the questions never did. I did everything I could to bury it, to forget about that night, but it kept creeping back into my thoughts, especially in moments of quiet. There were nights when I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the image of Anderson and Carter standing motionless in the dark. I began to question everything: the light, the way they acted afterward, the marks on their skin. I started to research, to look into anything that might explain what had happened to them. But every lead I followed ended up going nowhere. There were whispers online, rumors about strange lights over Baghdad during the invasion, but nothing concrete, nothing that tied it directly to us. No matter how hard I looked, I could never find the answers. And as the years went by, I started to realize something. Maybe there were no answers. Maybe what happened to us was just one of those things that couldn't be explained. One of those things you live with and never talk about because the truth is so far beyond anything your mind can grasp. There's a part of me that still wonders about Anderson and Carter. Where are they now? Are they out there somewhere still changed? I'll never know. All I have is that night, the light in the sky, the strange disappearance, the unexplainable silence that followed. But sometimes, just sometimes, I wonder if the real horror wasn't the lights or the missing soldiers, but the fact that I was never able to forget. That whatever happened, whatever they did to us, didn't just disappear. It left a scar, and now I can't help but feel like I'm waiting for something else, for some sign that it's not over. I don't know if I'll ever be able to shake that feeling. All I know is that I'll never forget that night. I'll never forget the sky over Baghdad, or the 2 men who vanished without a trace. And I'll never forget the feeling of being watched, like something was waiting for me, just out of reach. I've never told anyone about what happened in Iraq. I can't. I know how crazy it sounds, and maybe part of me doesn't want anyone else to carry that weight. The truth is, I don't know what happened to Anderson and Carter, or why it happened to us. I don't even know if I want to know, but there's something in me, deep down, that feels like it's not over. Like whatever that thing was, it's still out there, waiting. And maybe Just maybe, one day, it'll come back for me too. So, what did you think of this story? Did it scare you? Was there a part that gave you chills or stuck with you the most? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. If you've had a similar experience or have suggestions for improving future videos, let me know too. Thank you for watching and being part of this amazing community. See you in the next story.